The agenda this week surveyed the fire risk for Ontario's boreal forest, checked up on innovations in mental health care delivery, and probed advances in organ donation in the province. The agenda's week in review begins with efforts to cool the GTHA's overheated housing market. This is foreign buyers in Toronto. This is the new tax on non-resident home buyers. According to Toronto Real Estate Board, here we go, between 2008 and 2017, so basically over the last decade, the average share of foreign buyers in the Greater Golden Horseshoe was 2.3%. The majority of those buyers, between 87 and 90%, purchased their home as a place to live. In which case, go ahead, Cynthia, the non-resident speculation tax is going to have what kind of impact?
No impact. Well, I think a very minimal impact. If there's an impact, it's because people worry to themselves, well, should I sell my house? Maybe there's not going to be enough buyers. It will be sort of a secondary impact on it. But the fact is that most data that comes out, and I haven't seen the source of that data precisely, but it does seem like the Toronto players, the foreign speculators, are just not a large part of the market.
Craig, one of the things that confused me was that if you think speculation is bad, I'm not sure, if it's evil, I'm not sure why it's only evil when non-residents do it, but when local people do it, it's okay. So what is the value in putting a spec tax on non-residents only as opposed to everybody?
Well, I think the economic rationale is, we're talking about people who are not invested in the local economy. They're not living here, working here, contributing to the local economy, paying taxes here.
But if you just buy a place to flip it a month later, how exactly is that contributing to the local economy?
Well, the person's living there, and if the person makes income off that property, then they're going to spend money in that economy.
But they're not living there, that's the point. If they buy a place and flip it a month later before moving in, how is that contributing anything to anything?
But if that person is actually living in the province and is flipping properties and getting income out of it, it might be inflating prices, but that person is in the domestic economy.
Gotcha.
Or cynically.
But if we talk about the impact that this is going to have, right? We don't actually have good data on non-resident purchases of real estate in the local marketplace.
We have good anecdotal data. I can name the houses on my blog where it's happened. So what the province at least has done is they kicked open the door and said that, and we're setting up a group to look at a local tax for local tax.
And I think this is a first step measure, right? So if this doesn't work, the province will probably start thinking about, okay, maybe we should broaden this out to speculators across the market.
What do you mean if it doesn't work? How do you know if it works?
Well, you'll see a cooling in price behavior.
Not if it's only 3% of the sales in the city.
Well, so the government number that they're quoting is around 8. They think it's around 8%. The Ipsos Reid did a survey. They said it was around 5%. The TREB numbers say it's like 2 to 3%. It isn't a big part of the market, but also remember that from an economic point of view, the price for the unit is set by the final bidder. So in point of fact, even if it's only 3% of the market or 5% of the market, that actually has a greater impact on setting the price because those are the individuals that are actually paying the higher price, right? So their price effect might be larger. And we did see in Vancouver that after the foreign buyer tax was applied, you did have a drop in activity. You did see a drop in foreign purchases of real estate in the marketplace. But as I said at the start, I actually think this is one of those things that has a short-term effect. The market will, after about 6 months, it'll basically sort out and go back to, okay, well, how attractive is real estate in Toronto? Wow, it's still attractive. So I think that this is a measure that's going to have some short-term impact and limited impact. But the other point is it's a psychological one, which we've already heard in terms of domestic buyers saying, whoa, wait a second, let's see what happens with these measures before I go and place a property on. I think we're seeing that in Vancouver, right? Initially, there was a psychological impact of domestic sellers. Now, that impact is starting to wane as they're realizing.
Tell me, you said a second ago, if we were going to be cynical about this.
Yes, if we're going to be, in response to your question, why are we targeting foreign buyers, foreign speculators and not domestics?
The cynical reason we're going to study local.
Well, the cynical reason is because foreign buyers don't vote. Right, because they're outsiders, and there's also something reassuring about blaming our problems on foreigners and outsiders. And it would be lovely if we could just say it's somebody else doing that.
I thought Liberals didn't do that. I thought they didn't.
Well, I don't know. That's my cynical view. That's my unnatural cynical state. I don't know.
How useful do you think this is going to be?
I don't think it's going to have a huge impact. I've said for the longest time, part of what's inflating our market is foreign capital, but not necessarily foreign buyers, right? I look at the agreement of purchase and sale on all our projects, and it might have 3 or 4 foreign buyers on there, but a lot of the buyers that come into the sales office, you know, they're recent immigrants. They live in Unionville, they live in Markham, they live in Richmond Hill, but they have relatives in another country, and they're giving them money to go buy real estate. They fundamentally believe in real estate as an investment asset class. They've seen the prices go up, you know, for 20 consecutive years in the GTA marketplace. They compare the values in Toronto to other global cities and say, okay, Hong Kong's $3,500 a square foot. You know, New York's $4,000 a square foot. Toronto's $800 a square foot, right? Just makes sense that Toronto would arise and go up to those levels eventually. So what a better place to put your money.
Can somebody help me with this? And I'm probably wrong on this, so educate the host here for a second. Every time there's a house sale, there's a land transfer tax that's paid, right?
Yes.
The municipality gets that tax, right?
There's the municipality and the province.
And the province.
There's 2.
So it is financially not in the interest of either government in terms of their revenues to dampen down this kind of activity, because presumably they profit on it, their coffers profit every time the market goes nuts. So anybody want to explain to me why they would want to tamp down on this?
And homeowners benefit in the sense that my house is making a ton of money because I purchased earlier.
The only people who don't benefit are the people who are trying to get in.
That's
but the government's benefit, the homeowners who sell benefit, the people who buy benefit because they're getting their place. So why is this happening exactly?
So this is the balance of political debate versus an economic debate, and governments have to straddle both worlds.
So it's all politics, frankly.
No.
Go ahead, explain.
If there's a boom-bust cycle in the real estate market, it's going to hurt government revenues in an enormous way, right? So ultimately, the way I view these measures is they're not dramatic, but they're a gentle tap on the brakes to try and slow things down. And what we saw in the United States, and I don't think that there's really strong parallels between the housing behavior in Canada and the United States or the risks, but it's illustrative of the fact that if you have a large collapse in the housing market, the single biggest asset that people have, you are going to have significant economic consequences from it. So from a government policy point of view, you know, giving up a little revenue now in order to reduce the risk of a big swing in tax revenue down the road actually makes an awful lot of economic sense.
Craig, that's why we invited you here today, because that I needed to understand better. Okay, good. More than 85% of Ontarians are in favor of organ donation. 3.7 million Ontarians have registered their consent for organ donation. However, that's only 30% of the eligible population. Nearly 1.8 million Ontarians mistakenly believe they are registered organ and tissue donors. Parry Sound and North Bay lead the pack when it comes to registration. 54% of those eligible in those communities have registered. Now, Kimberly, let me get you in here because Parry Sound, North Bay, those are not big cities. Those are smaller communities. And apparently those living in smaller and or rural communities have a much better track record than those of us who live in big cities at registering to donate their organs. Tell us why.
That's an interesting question. I think from what we understand, it's families in those or individuals in those areas are more prone to volunteerism. They're interested in following through. But if you look across Canada, the bigger cities are a challenge to encourage people. More importantly, though, we can also think about age. People in the age group of over 40, having made decisions about end of life, generally have signed a will or moved forward. In the case of organ donation, not so much. As you can see, only a third, and that's consistent. So someone earlier mentioned to me, we're good at starting, not so good at finishing. It's consistent across the country that people don't finalize those express good wishes by actioning them.
So some of it is age, because cities tend to have younger people living there who don't think much about these things necessarily. I wonder if some of it as well, the cities are also places where there are more immigrants and new Canadians who may you know, come with different customs as it relates to organ donation. Might that be part of it?
That can be part of it for sure. When we talk to different groups, there is some concern with following through on those actions. But consistently, we see that Canadians, despite polls that tell us they support organ donation, are not taking that next step to action it.
They support it in principle, but Ronnie, pick up the story here, because I've seen polling that says 70% of eligible Ontarians are still hesitant about donating. How come?
I think people procrastinate. Good intentions and actions are two different things. They procrastinate, they put it off the same way people put off their will.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to think about this stuff.
We don't want to think about it. And yet, when you do think about it, you're relieving your family of such a burden by telling them what you want to do with your assets. Also, people are superstitious. They think if I register today or make up my will today, something's going to befall me tomorrow. Well, that is not the case. And we tell people that statistics say you are 5 times more likely in your lifetime to need an organ than to ever be a donor.
Is there any religious prohibition that you're aware of in any of the major religions in the world that prohibit organ donation? No.
Absolutely not.
So that's not it.
Absolutely what Ronnie said. It's people are suspicious or concerned.
Superstitious?
They don't action it. So they have those good express wishes. Though we recently did a poll just in this month from ISPOS in Canada, and those people that are interested in being donors, many of them, only 1/3 of them have actioned it, talked to their family or registered. So interesting as well, 80% of them say they would take an organ. So there's a support, there's an interest in receiving an organ, they just haven't finished taking that action.
I wonder about that moment. I don't know if you've ever had the conversation with the family that donated to you, but obviously there is that moment of awkwardness. You know, when the donor has died, and somebody at the hospital's got to have a conversation saying, look, I know you're experiencing the worst moment of your life here, but we need a fast decision on the organs.
Yeah, with having the honor of meeting Kim and her family, I've been able to talk about some of that, and you know, I've been able to get to know Tyler as well, which has been an unbelievable honor in itself.
The young man whose heart is in your body now.
In my body, yes. But Kim did mention to me and has talked that they never talked about it as a family prior to. So they were part of that group of families that they weren't considering it. They were young. Tyler was 15 years old. I mean, you don't think of that with your children, right?
So do you know about that moment at the hospital when some medical personnel went up to them and said?
Kim talked about it. She talked about that's how it was her introduction to Trillium. So yeah, Kim and I have discussed that. And you know, they went through the process that Ronnie was probably going to allude to. It's how the coordinators come into the hospital and their role in this whole thing. And it's not just about, you know, coming up and asking. You know, they're there to work with the families. They're compassionate individuals. They've also been trained. I've had the honor of meeting a number of them outside of that situation, but Tyler wasn't registered, and you know, Kim and her family had that discussion right at the hospital. I know one state that Kim did say is after they'd made that decision, her family was in there, and of course they were mourning. But Kim brought to her family's attention that there's a number of families now that are crying tears of joy, and that's really the other side of this whole story. It really is a bittersweet story, but that is the only reason I'm here. So,
Leslie, I want to follow up with you on what happens at that moment when, let's say it is an older person who's died, and let's say that person has checked off the box that says, yes, I'm happy to have my organs donated to some needy family, but then the rest of his family or her family gets involved and they think, no, we don't like this idea. How do you resolve those issues?
Well, let me take one step back and address an earlier comment that was made. I mean, I think it requires a very skilled individual to turn the moment of awkwardness that you describe into the moment of opportunity that we really think our families deserve. The other thing I would say, and I think this is relevant to your last question, is that I think there's still an element of concern that among families that if they say that their loved one is going to be an organ donor, that will in some way influence the care that person may receive at that hospital. I think it's been made very clear here that the organ donor professionals are not even made aware of the existence of these patients until death has occurred or death is imminent as well. So we need to reassure our patients and their families that becoming an organ donor does not in any way compromise the care that they might receive. It's not like they're going to be steered down a different pathway or given different medications and stuff like that. That issue where family decisions can override, in some cases, the wishes of the recipient is still one that we struggle with. The key, of course, is in another environment, not the intensive care unit waiting room, that potential donor had the opportunity to speak to his family and to say, guess what I just did today? I just registered online to be an organ donor, or I just, in the old days, filled out the back of my driver's license and did it that way as well. Because that brings up the topic for discussion in an environment where it can be discussed sort of in a more objective way, but also, I think, helps to guide the family in their decision making as well. You could argue whether or not families should have the right to override the express written wishes of a potential donor, and I think that's something that's worth further debate. But I think the key is not to raise the issue for the very first time in the intensive care room, waiting room, and that's what happens, unfortunately, far too often.
How long does the average Ontarian who needs psychiatric care have to wait now before they can get some help?
Well, the sad answer to that is we don't know. Unlike other areas of the healthcare system where wait times have been developed to monitor access and accountability, that's virtually absent in the mental health system. There are some studies that suggest that access is quite poor, and I would refer to a study by a colleague of mine who recently passed away, Elliot Goldner. And very briefly, he did a study where he had a research assistant pretend that she was referring a patient from a family health team in Vancouver. And the bullet point of the study is, out of the 230 psychiatrists who were seeing patients in Vancouver, 6 were available to see the referral patient in a reasonable time.
What's a reasonable time?
Well, I think they was in 2 to 3 weeks.
In 2 to 3 weeks. So basically you're saying 95% of the people would have been waiting months?
95% of the people were not seeing patients.
Oh, so would not have been able to get any access, period?
Correct.
Okay. And do you have any reason to believe that that is not indicative of the situation here in Ontario?
I think we'd see similar findings. Maybe not the same 95%, but I think we would see that it's very difficult to access psychiatrists.
Here's you in the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry from, when is this? This is about a year ago. You wrote the following: the supply of Ontario full-time psychiatrists is not equally distributed across the province, with many more psychiatrists practicing in Toronto and Ottawa than in suburban or rural regions. As the supply of psychiatrists increased, the proportion of psychiatrists adopting low-volume practices increased. For example, approximately 10% of full-time psychiatrists in Toronto see fewer than 40 patients annually, compared with 4% in low-supply regions, and approximately 40% of full-time psychiatrists in Toronto see fewer than 100 patients annually, compared with 10% in low-supply regions. Okay, this basically sort of confirms what our supposition is, which is it's easier to get seen in the big cities than it would be elsewhere. But those numbers, and I don't know, this is your business, so you tell me, those numbers seem like fairly low numbers in terms of a psychiatrist's patient roster. Are they?
They are low, and it has to do with the style of practice among the psychiatrists who have those low rosters.
Does it mean that even though the rosters are low, these patients are being seen quite frequently, which explains why psychiatrists can't take on new patients?
Correct. In the original study that cited those, which was in 2014, all the psychiatrists had to be full-time, which means that they had to have virtually the same number of visits seen. So those psychiatrists who saw fewer than 40 patients were seeing them very, very frequently.
And do we infer that the 40 patients probably present very complex, difficult to serve cases?
In the original study, that was not the case. The patients that were seen in this low-volume, high-frequency practice predominantly resided in high-income neighborhoods and had virtually never had a psychiatric hospitalization. One thing I speculate is that if you work in a low-supply area, you are less likely to have a solo practice not attached to anything, and you're more likely to be working in a hospital setting or attached to a community agency. And I do believe that being attached to a hospital or an institution of some sort that provides healthcare and mental health care provides some sort of built-in accountabilities that aren't necessarily there for solo practitioners.
Tell me if, I mean, this makes common sense to me, which means it might not necessarily be true. So you tell me, if we want to see twice as many patients as we do today, should we have twice as many psychiatrists?
I think that was the big issue that the two of my studies raised, and the issue has to do with style of practice. If we generate more psychiatrists, but they end up practicing in Toronto and furthermore adopt low-volume practices, that's going to make a trivial dent in the access problem. And one thing that I wanted to sort of generate is a larger debate about what the role of a psychiatrist is in a publicly funded system and who they should be seeing.
I don't want to pry into your privacy if you don't care to talk about this, but if you do want to let us know a little about why you felt you needed those mental health services to begin with, which therefore led to this development, we're all ears.
Yeah, so as I kind of mentioned, I'm an engineer and I went to engineering school, and I think throughout school I had anxiety. But I never called it anxiety because I was surrounded with a lot of people who had it too, and it was just being nervous and not being able to sleep. And it was only after that I got a job and I was working that my anxiety got to a point where I felt like this isn't normal anymore. I went to my family doctor and she prescribed some medication, and I just quickly got home and I Googled it and I was like, there's no way I'm buying this because there's so much side effects. And my aunt actually told me to try therapy, and I had never thought of it, and it took me 3 different therapists until I found someone that I really liked, and I was introduced to the whole world of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I had anxiety, which meant that, day to day, maybe people didn't even know that I had anxiety, but I would go to the bathroom and I would just like have a panic attack once in a while. And it was just like it was messing my sleep and my eating. But it was so interesting that without taking medication and by just doing my CBT, because my anxiety wasn't severe enough, that by just doing CBT for a couple of months, I was not only able to manage my anxiety, but I got the coping skills that I needed, but then I was able to deal with things so much better than everyone else around me. And so I started telling everyone that they should do CBT. and I heard the same answer from everyone. They can't afford it. They can't leave their job because they have a 9-to-5 job. I did too, but I was able to just work around it and leave work early sometimes. And also they felt stigmatized, and they didn't want to sit in a waiting room even if they found the right therapist. So I was in search for something for my friends and family when I realized we need video therapy back in Canada. And it exists in Europe and in other places in the world. And so we just needed to make it available for Canadians. Necessity
being the mother of invention, you invented it yourself. There you go. How many people do you estimate you've helped through the creation of Tranquil.com?
Yeah, so we have over 3,000. Actually, when we first spoke, I thought it was around 2,700. And I checked today, it's over 3,000 people who've used Tranquil.
Gotcha. Congratulations. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, Rebecca, here we go. Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. You have a relationship and a connection to that place. What is it?
Sure. Yeah, I had the privilege and opportunity to report on a brand new program that's been instituted at CHEO, as well as the Royal Mental Health Center in Ottawa. And so they are establishing a new program called Choice and Partnerships Approach, CAPA for short. And what's exciting about this new approach in psychiatry is that it will sound common sense when I explain it to you, but it really turns psychiatry on its head. So instead of a patient getting referred to a psychiatrist in the hospital and waiting the long months to see that one psychiatrist.
And it can be months,
And it can be months. And prior to this being implemented, patients were waiting 6 months, 7 months, up to a year to be seen by psychiatrists in the hospital. What they've been able to do is reorient and tap into the allied health professionals within the hospital. So the psychologists, the social workers, the occupational therapists. And the patients then come in to what's called a choice appointment. And they sit down with the clinician and they discuss what is the most pressing problem to them at that moment. The diagnosis might come a bit later. Medication might come a little bit later, but in that first session, it's just sitting down with that clinician and coming up with a plan to address that that important issue that's troubling the patient.
So you may not see the psychiatrist right away, but you'll see somebody right away.
That's correct. You'll
first
see
contact, quickly.
First contact. And for a lot of patients, that's as much as they need. And they're able to go back in the community, practice some of the skills. They're able to be connected with community services to address that big problem that's facing them.
Ontario's forest regions, and maybe, Sophie, we can look at this map and you can help us understand. We see the four different kinds of, by the four different shadings here, the four different kinds of forest regions we have in the province. What are the forests that are, I guess, most likely to catch fire?
So specifically, I look at fires in the boreal forest. Fires tend to be concentrated across the boreal region, which is north and mid Canada, and it stretches all the way from British Columbia right through Alberta and then all the way through to Ontario, as you see there.
So the communities that would be in those boreal forests, how much at risk are they of being wiped out by forest fires?
Well, it depends how close they are to the forests and what type of forest they specifically are, and whether the forest areas around those communities are fire smarted, protected by management techniques.
Fire smart? What does that mean?
So it's an initiative which began in Alberta but is now nationwide, and it's all to do with preventing fires and living with and managing for wildfires. You
got to know about that too, don't you?
Yeah, it's an incredible program, especially from the education perspective, because I think a lot of people look at forest fires and they go, "There's nothing we can do about it." Right, and it becomes quite fatalistic. Well, it's kind of, I look at it like an earthquake, right? There's not a lot you can do when it comes to an earthquake, but at least to prevent it from happening, but there's things that can lessen your impact. So FireSmart sort of takes the perspective and starts right at the individual. What can we do as an individual homeowner? What can I do to safeguard my home? Right, whether it's landscaping, building materials, if I'm living in a rural area, how am I managing the forest around me? And then it walks it out to the community level and the municipal level, looks at things like how do we create a barricade around the community that's natural, right? We're not talking about a kilometer wide road around a community as a fire break, but how do we manage growth around the community? And then also looking at a lot of these areas they're quite rural, so how do we access these areas? We looked at Fort McMurray, having that twinned highway to allow for rapid egress of a municipality. If that 4-lane highway wasn't in place, we would have had a much different result with the evacuation.
Those are the kinds of things you could do. Now, you're based in Hamilton, but obviously you've had a look at Fort Mac.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about about the land around Fort McMurray and how fire smart they were to be prepared for what happened a year ago?
So there were definitely fire smart initiatives in place around Fort McMurray, and one of the issues is these black spruce forests. You talked about all the different types of forest, and the boreal is a mosaic of different types of forests and wetlands as well. And these wetlands are typically dominated by black spruce trees. And there are circumstances where the black spruce become much larger than typically they are in wetlands, and they are very, very dangerous in terms of fire. So they can spot fires, so they can throw their fire up to about 2 kilometers, which actually was a really big problem in the Slave Lake fires, which was the last really big wildland urban fire that Alberta saw.
I remember being out in Western Canada once, this is years and years ago when I was working for CBC and covering a big forest fire out there. And I always wondered, as a city boy, how does a fire jump a road? And then I saw it happen. And my goodness gracious, I mean, it's really hard to contain these things, isn't it?
Yeah, very difficult, especially once the fire gets either up into the canopy of the black spruce, it's very difficult to contain there, and then also it's very difficult to manage once it gets into the soil, which is a different type of fire, but very difficult management issues all round.
Now you're from here originally, right? But
Yes.
you're out there now. You're out in Alberta right now.
That's right.
So, I mean, I don't know, this may seem like an obvious or dumb question, but the kinds of issues that we're dealing with here to make sure the boreal forest doesn't explode on us, and what they're dealing with in Alberta, I mean, it's all the same forest, so is it all the same issues?
I mean, really, I think when you're talking about wildland-urban interface, forest fires and forest management, I mean, that's one of the reasons that the Fire Smart program, while it was an Alberta program, it translates so well nationally. Yeah, similar forests, not the same, but anytime you've got communities that are embedded inside very dense boreal forest, you're going to have that same risk factor.
Now, one of the things, Sophie, I guess we've learned over the years is that forest fires do happen naturally, and they're sometimes good things to have happen. Can you explain why that is?
Yeah, definitely. It's really something that people tend to forget, or in situations like this, they get overshadowed by all of the really awful, negative things that we hear. But forest fires have always been and will always be a very healthy and essential part of the boreal ecosystem and that circle of life with the forest. So the fire wipes the forest out, and then it opens it up and means that it can regenerate. And with that regeneration, you have the new tree growth, the intake of carbon for that tree growth, and it's very, very essential and very necessary on the landscape. But what we really need to do moving forward is make sure that we can manage for that healthy burn rather than the devastating burns that we saw.
We're not talking about people being careless at their campsites, but we're talking about lightning strikes and I guess what else? What else starts a fire naturally? These are the things that happen.
Yeah, and I think there's a reality that yes, there are natural causes for wildfire, i.e. lightning strikes, but I think what we're seeing is an increase in human-induced fires as well. Mm-hmm. And you look at the major fires, certainly in the West. We think about Slave Lake, the Horse River fire in Fort McMurray, obviously. These were human-induced, but accelerated by climate and accelerated by what was happening in the conditions were just perfect at that moment, where you had very, very high temperatures, unseasonably high, and incredibly low humidity, and it caused for that rapid expansion of fire.
Are you seeing impacts of climate change here?
Well, one thing I would say is that the mosaic on the landscape, these forests and wetlands, well, the wetlands, through human-induced drying and drainage for industry purposes or forestry, and then moving forward, potentially climate change, increased drought duration, means that because they become drier, they become more densely treed, and the soil there goes from being waterlogged and saturated to being dry and ready to burn, and that can definitely add to both the severity and the extent of fires on the landscape.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review for this Friday, May the 5th, 2017. You can see all of those conversations in their entirety at tvo.org, on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, and thanks to our nightly Twitter live stream on our Periscope page. That's periscope.tv/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.